In an ironic twist, we are launching this new repertory path with Beethoven and his only opera, Fidelio, produced just one time in the history of Kentucky Opera's past 62 years. He began composing Fidelio in 1804 when he was 34 years old. By then he had developed a reputation for himself in Vienna, following in the footsteps of Haydn and Mozart, but he had not yet created the masterworks for which we all recognize today as the craft of a true genius. It should be noted that at this time his hearing was already diminishing. Whether or not this ailment or a general decline in his health contributed to his erratic or irritable behavior, it is debatable. But there exists no doubt that his work as a composer took a dramatic turn, creating what we now call his middle period. It is here, in this period, that Beethoven pulled the entire world of composition into the 19th century, a world of upheaval, political conflict, and passionate struggle. In this period, from 1803 to 1814, Beethoven pens 6 of his most important symphonies, leaving only the 9th to come late in his life. Though he began Fidelio at the beginning of this period, it took him more than 10 years of revisions and a parade of librettists for him to find the resolution in this work that had so long eluded him. Now, to give you a sense of Beethoven's compositional transition in this score, let's begin with the opening scene, a duet that could be found in any late 18th century comedy. The opera is constructed as a Singspiel, a form German composers reserved for comedies, written in the German language and distinguished by spoken dialogue in between the musical numbers, much like our own modern American musical. In this first scene, we are introduced to Jacchino, an assistant jailer, trying to win the love of his boss's daughter, Marcelline, who will have nothing to do with him. So please welcome to the microphone Katie Linhart as Marcelline and Marco Camarotto as Jacchino to perform Jetzt, Schätzchen, Jetzt.
Schätzchen, jetzt sind wir allein, wir können vertraulich nun plaudern.
Es wird schon nichts Wichtiges sein, ich darf bei der Arbeit dich sagen.
Ein Wörtchen, du trotzige Du.
So sprich nur, ich höre dir zu, ich höre dir zu, ich höre dir zu.
Wenn du mich freundlicher blickest, so bring ich ein Wörtchen hervor.
Nein, du dich nicht in mich schickest, verstopp ich mir voll zu so.
Ein Heulen, nur hör mir zu, lass ich zu. Ich habe zum Weib dich gewählt, verstehst du?
Das ist ja doch klar.
Und wenn mir dein Ja-Wort mich fehlet, für was meinst du?
Jetzt dir ein Wort.
Wir könnten in wenigen Wochen.
Recht schön, du bestimmst schon die Zeit, du bestimmst schon die Zeit. Recht schön,
recht schön,
du bestimmst schon die Zeit. Recht schön, du bestimmst schon die Zeit.
Thank you, Marco. So, as you just heard, this duet is grounded in classic compositional style from the 18th century, with a real reserved balance of form and structure. The orchestra is accompaniment, supporting the singer or the melody without detracting from it. Contrast that with the Fidelio overture that Beethoven composed for the 1814 revision of the opera, which now became the standard used for performances today. Let's hear Corey, our accompanist, Corey Batty, who is our accompanist and repetiteur for this production. Corey's going to play the opening measures to this overture as Beethoven explores dramatic themes that are at the heart of the opera. Thank you, Corey. In this opening from Fidelio's overture, we heard these opening passages as an exploration of a new compositional style. This is not an independent orchestral work as was the fashion in the 18th century. This is a thematic introduction to the opera of the musical and dramatic themes of Fidelio. And what are those themes? Triumph over tyranny, man's rescue from man's oppression, man's struggle and eventual resolution into a better life. Here, in the overture, we find Beethoven's signature expressiveness of the orchestra, highlighting contrast and colors, evoking emotions and exploring conflict. It is not an exercise in balance and moderation, and it certainly does not portend to a comedy. And here may lie a clue into Beethoven's struggle with this work. At its heart is a simple melodrama, lighthearted, with comedic tendencies based on a rescue drama that was a quite popular theme in France after the French Revolution. A bit later, we will explore some of the darker colors of this story that inspired Beethoven to move musically in such a new direction. Before that, let's hear another example of his earlier style. This also is from the first scene of the opera. After the opening duet, which you just heard, Marceline is left alone to forget about Iachino and think only of her true love, Fidelio. Fidelio is the assistant jailer recently hired by Rocco, the head jailer and father of Marceline. So let's welcome back Katie Linhart as Marceline to sing a portion of her aria, O wär ich schon mit dir vereint, if only I already with you were united.
Ich schon mit dir vereint und dürfte man dich nennen. Ein Mädchen darf ja, was es meint, zur Hälfte nur bekennen. Doch wenn ich dich erretten muss, ob einem warmen Herzenskuss, wenn nichts uns stört auf Erden. Die Hoffnung schon erfüllt die Brust mit unaussprechlich süßer Lust. Wie glücklich will ich werden, wie glücklich will ich werden. Die Hoffnung schon erfüllt die Brust mit unaussprechlich süßer Lust. Wie glücklich, ja, wie glücklich will ich werden. Die Hoffnung schon erfüllt die Brust mit unaussprechlich süßer Lust.
Thank you, Katie. Let me take a moment to just introduce our audience to our other artists here in the studio, the other artists who have gathered for this wonderful production of Beethoven's Fidelio. On my right here, first we have Dean Peterson, who is singing the role of Rocco, the jailer. Just stand up, Dean, if you will. Thank you very much for joining us. We have Mark Walters, who is doing the role of Pizarro. Next to him is Jonathan Burton, who is singing Florestan. And our Fidelio, Leonora, is Cara Shea Thompson. Next to her is Lillian Grogg, our stage director. And finally, I would like to introduce Joe Mekovich, who is our music director and conductor for this production. Now, two artists that I want to bring forward along with Katie. Katie, if you'll join us again at the microphone here. Katie is singing the role of Marceline. I would also like to invite our two studio artists, Marco Camarotto, who you just heard doing the role of Iachino, and we also have Zach Owens, who's doing the role of Don Fernando, our two studio artists. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, or lady and gentlemen, sorry. Down at the shorter microphone, Katie. There you go. Katie, just take a moment and introduce yourself to our audience.
Hi, I'm Katie Linhart. Nice to be back here in Louisville.
Yes, you were here 2 seasons ago as one of our studio artists.
Yes.
And you're from Cincinnati?
Yeah, I live in Cincinnati now, originally from Des Moines, Iowa.
Aw, glad to have you in the area. And you studied at such a cute little town. You studied at Cincinnati Conservatory of Music, correct?
I did not.
Oh, you did not?
I know. I'm one of the rare ones who just live in Cincinnati. I went to school at Simpson College, and then I did my graduate work at the University of Missouri, Kansas City.
Simpson College in Indianola.
Yep.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, welcome back, Marco. You were here with us last season again.
Yep.
And tell us about yourself.
Okay, well, I'm originally from Schenectady, New York, and I moved to Cincinnati, and I lived there for 5 years, and I went to the conservatory. I got my master's there and an artist diploma, and I'm very happy to be back. I'll be here all year, so enjoy. Get used to this.
How fortunate for us. Yeah. And Zach, welcome to Louisville.
Thank you. I'm not as arrogant as that guy.
Just remember, he's a tenor.
I know.
There is a difference, my dear friend. But you do know each other.
Yes. We both went to CCM. So we knew each other at Cincinnati and spent 4 long years together.
It's good.
And now you're up in Chicago.
Yeah.
Finished with school.
Yes, I just got done this year.
Great.
And Chicago's where I'm from, so I'm back up north now.
Wonderful. Well, I know it was fortunate for us. You came in on a very short notice, auditioned for us, and 2 weeks later we had a cancellation and you were able to join us. So
it was awesome.
Fortunate for us. Thank you all for joining us on this production. Delighted to have you. So getting back to our story, we learn that Fidelio is really Leonora, a woman disguised as a man. How unfortunate for Marceline. Leonore is the wife of the wrongfully incarcerated Florestan, who has been lost to her for some time. She came to the prison in the disguise to search for her husband. Though she has not found him, she has found the attention of a naive Marceline who has fallen desperately in love for this proper new worker. In a beloved quartet, Beethoven provides deep insight into the first characters we meet. This interplay was not found in the original play, but Beethoven wisely included it. He constructs it as a canon, starting with the delighted Marceline, who introduces the melody, singing, "Mir ist so wunderbar." To me it is so wonderful, the thought of marriage to Fidelio. Then comes the apprehensive Fidelio, who knows she must stay in Rocco's good graces if she is to find her husband. Rocco enters, feeling proud of Fidelio's hard work and believing he has found a good mate for his daughter. This leaves, of course, the fourth entrance of the canon, a very jealous Iachino. So please welcome to the microphone Katie Linhart as Marceline, Kara Shea Thompson as Fidelio, Dean Peterson as Rocco, and Marco Camarotto as Iachino in this Act 1 quartet, Mir ist so wunderbar.
Wie schwach der Hof, es senkt das Herz mir ein, es engt das Herz mir liebt mich, es klebt es ist klar, ich werde glücklich sein. Mir ist so wie groß ist die Gefahr, es senkt das Herz, es senkt, ich mach mich stark, der Hof erscheint, der Beste scheint. Ich werde geliebt, ich werde glücklich, ich werde glücklich sein. Wie groß ist die Gefahr, es senkt das Herz, bevor steht.
Ja, Menschen, er wird ein, ja, Menschen, er das war der Vater er wird so wunderbar. Er wird so wunderbar. Mir fällt kein Weg ein.
Thank you, everyone. Dean, if I could just ask you to stay at the microphone. Welcome to Louisville, Dean.
Thank you.
Great to have you. This is your debut with Kentucky Opera.
It is.
It's not your debut with the role, though.
Well, I did it about 20 years ago, long enough that I've forgotten most of it. So it feels like a debut, I'll tell you that much.
You were just a puppy out of the kennel at that point.
What do you think about that? Well, maybe not a puppy. I might have been a couple years older.
That's all right. Tell us about yourself right now. You're living in Florida.
I'm living in Florida. I just moved from Lauderdale up to a place called Fort Pierce, which is southeast of Orlando, and a group of friends and I are starting our own little opera company down there in Palm Beach. So we're having a little fun. We've got a little concert opera thing that we've started up and doing some screaming and yelling. When's the first performance? Well, we're doing a Bluebeard's Castle in October 31st for Halloween. So we thought we'd do it, a little S&M, and have a little fun, you know. I'm joking. Well, not too much joking.
No. It's a good theme for Halloween.
Yeah, well, that's what we were thinking, you know, blood and guts and gore.
So it just happens to be an opera.
Yeah. You know.
I love it. Well, I can't thank you enough, Dean, for taking on this role, Rocco, for us.
Thanks.
And we're delighted to have you here in Louisville.
It's a privilege. This is a great cast and a great conductor and a great director. And so I'm really fortunate to be here. Thanks.
Thank you, Dean. So continuing on, Leonora, still disguised as Fidelio, realizes she must move quickly to find her husband. Rocco reveals to her that there is a secret prisoner being held in the deepest part of the prison. In the trio Gut, Zernchen, Gut, we see Leonora journey through a myriad of human emotions as she reflects on her fears, her one hope, and the potential joy to come if she but endures with courage. She commits herself yet again to find her husband that she believes is the secret prisoner. Contrasting her emotionally are Rocco and Marceline. He, in particular, is delighted at the prospect of a marriage between Fidelio and his daughter. So please welcome back Cara Shea Thompson as Leonora, Katie Linhart as Marceline, and Dee Peterson to sing this trio from Act 1 of Fidelio.
Hat jemand Mut, dann wird's dir auch gelingen, dann hält wird hart durch Gegenwart bei fürchterlichen Dingen.
Ich habe Mut, mit kaltem Blut will ich hinab mich wagen. Kein Liebe schon, auch hohe Leiden, den tragen. Dein gutes Herz wird manchen Schmerz in diesen Grüft ein Leiden. Dein Kehr zurück, der Liebe Glück und unendbare Freude.
Du wirst dein Glück ganz sicher bauen.
Ich hab auf Gott und Recht vertrauen, darf sie auch jetzt angeschauen, der Liebe Macht ist doch nicht
Du wirst dein Glück ganz
Ich hab auf
sicher
Gott
Thank you, everyone. So if you just joined us, you are listening to Kentucky Opera's live broadcast of Lunch and Listen, featuring artists from our upcoming performances of Beethoven's Fidelio. If you would like to attend a performance on September 19th or 21st, you may call 502-584-7777 or 1-800-690-9236. You may also purchase tickets and hear more information or see more information about each of our productions this season by going online at www.kyopera.org. Now, for good reason, we consider Beethoven one of the great transitional composers. He led the way through defiant struggle out of the enlightened 18th century, the 18th century of rational form, and into an explosion of emotion, color, passion, and conflict. Apt descriptors of art and composition in the 19th century, what we call the Big R Romantic era. In Fidelio, we see this transition as he struggled with the work throughout the 10 years of his middle period. To talk with us about this composition, let's welcome to the microphone our music director and conductor, Joe Mekovich. Welcome, Joe.
Hello, David.
Glad to have you back in Louisville.
Absolutely.
Last year with us on Tosca last year, but a very different piece in Beethoven. So we've been talking a lot about this transition. We've been talking about the struggle that Beethoven had, really moving away from form and structure and balance of the 18th century and completely full-blown into the 19th century in a matter of just 10 years. Everything changes from Beethoven moving forward. Can you tell us a little bit about your impressions of Beethoven in this work and your impressions of that struggle itself?
Yeah, you've hit on a number of adjectives that you can associate with Beethoven in this period. Actually, all of his music. I mean, he was obviously a historical figure that transitioned, as David said, from the classical period into the romantic period. But he himself, as David said again, was tormented. He was a very tormented soul. Before he wrote Fidelio, he did his very famous Heiligenstadt Testament, in which he was coming to terms with his deafness. And instead of killing himself, he said, I'm going to survive, I'm going to carry on, I'm going to live out my life and be a composer. So this torment is definitely in his music. And you have a lot of ideas and concepts, and I'm trying to get into this piece, of a thrusting of sound. There's something what we call forte pianos, forte and then piano, very, very fast. And the accent is very sharp. When we think of Italian music, like Puccini and David said Tosca, we think of the blossoming of the note. But in German music, especially Beethoven, it has a thrust, it has an edge to it. And that really sets up a whole different dynamic and really brings in a style that I'm trying to get across in this one and only opera by Beethoven.
And something else that I would like us to consider, too, in that vocally something changes. Vocally, there is a connection to what we consider the Helden tenor, what we would consider the Wagnerian singer, although Wagner didn't start composing until about 50, 60 years later, this voice. But the voice that is required for Fidelio is dramatically different than what came before.
Absolutely. I mean, you were getting into the Olympic stature of vocalisms here. It's incredibly difficult, the role of Leonora and the role of Florestan, not to mention all the other ones. They're very, very difficult. And he puts those demands, some very difficult singing, because the drama is very difficult and it matches that. Wagner very much thought that this Fidelio was a brilliant piece. And you definitely hear the seeds of Gesamtkunstwerk, which is the all-encompassing work that Wagner was so famous for, in some of these musical numbers. Definitely the arias and the recitatives that you'll hear in the production, where the text and the orchestra and the dramatic pulse are all united. You've heard the first couple numbers that they're formulaic. They're very much, you've heard Mozart, you've heard Haydn, things like that. You've heard those formulas. Well, Beethoven, being the revolutionary that he is starting to obliterate those formulas and really create something new.
And this is what we move into then in Act 2.
Absolutely.
Where he now really explores the themes that so inspired him, pulling away from the comedy and moving into the real drama, the real conflict, the real struggle, if you will. Yeah. And there was an interesting, on Studio 360 last fall, a very interesting program talking about Beethoven and how they now have done research to understand that we take Beethoven's tempos too slow. And at first they thought maybe his metronome was broken, but it wasn't, that he actually did want to push his audience beyond the level of comfort. Yeah. And he does that with singers, he does that with the orchestra colors. He's constantly moving his audience into territory that makes them feel uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And he pulls away in Act 1 from that comfort of balance into this zone of uncomfortability and struggle in Act 2. So, correct. Yes. Joe, just hang on a minute. I want to invite our stage director, Lillian, if you would join us, Lillian Grog. These are our two wonderful partners. And Lillian, you'll just want to get as close as you can to that microphone. Joe as the conductor and Lillian as the stage director are the two partners that put this production together. Welcome back, Lillian. Thank you for joining us on this production.
It's lovely being here again.
Yes, you were here 3 seasons ago, I guess, 2 seasons ago with The Marriage of Figaro, a new production that we did, and Joe conducted and played the harpsichord for that one. And this is a production, the Fidelio, that you did with Virginia Opera, correct?
Yes, about 10 years ago, maybe.
Okay.
The way it came about, and of course Fidelio, because of its nature, is extremely universally set. You don't really have to do it in the 18th century because it's in a prison. And what's the difference, an 18th century uniform, a 20th century uniform, a 21st century uniform? The nature of these establishments is pretty much the same, especially when they're run by a psychopath. And Fidelio, done in 20th century, closes no news anymore. This has been going on for 20, 30 years. And of course, the usual settings are the concentration camp, which is one that is happening right now in Santa Fe, the gulags, Banana Republic, dictatorships, and so forth. And I thought at the time, if I'm going to do this, I don't think I need to tell the audience again that the Nazis were bad, that dictatorship is bad, that tyrants are bad, that Stalin was a terrible man, or Robespierre, who really is the seed for Pizarro. And the original playwright was very careful to move it all to Spain, but he's really talking about Robespierre, who was, of course, a monster. So I thought, well, what else do we do, and how do we tell the audience the story in a new way that will, however, not contradict a word of the text? And the text actually doesn't tell you that this is a dictatorship and it's a terrible country. It tells you that the government is all right. Actually, the government saves the day at the end. It's that this individual who's running the place that is the problem. And it's a military man gone rogue. So I thought, well, what about this good and evil? How do we do this? I had seen a photo about 20 years ago in Baghdad during one of the many wars where somebody had thrown a grand piano off a fifth-story window. And it had crashed in the street and created an enormous amount of rubble. And it was one of the most painfully and shocking photos I'd ever seen. I kept it forever. And then when Fidelio came up, I thought, what if they're in a place that is that besieged, and that at the courtyard of this prison there is this ruined, destroyed piano, which to me symbolized the destruction of the arts, which I think is something that is happening today. I think that we're losing arts programs, and without people like you, where would we be? Theaters, opera houses are losing money. They're beginning to get smaller and smaller audiences. Children are not educated in music and literature and painting in the schools. And I think we're dulling the spirit of our world by the basic strangulation of the arts. And I thought that's a good metaphor to have. So that's where the whole idea, the visuals of the story came up. It's undefined 20th century place with a courtyard, with a jail, with a very realistic jail and jailers, and a man with a ragtag army, sort of like, I'd remind people of the Blackwater folks who are now in trouble again. And it's still telling the story forward, but from a 21st century sensibility.
Yes. Lillian and Joe, if you could just talk just briefly before we get into the next musical number, how does this partnership work within the context of this concept that we're working on? Maybe, Joe, you want to speak to that.
Yeah, I think it's very simple. The partnership comes with the text. I mean, what we do at Kentucky Opera and what I do hopefully in my career, and I know Lillian is committed to this, and these artists as well, is bringing these words alive, because that's what inspired Beethoven. He didn't have a tune and then write down the words. The words inspired the tune and the format. So coming from that and justifying the drama on the stage and the musical ideas, it all comes from the text. So when you have that as a foundation and you have that as the pulsing heart of what we do in our laboratory in the rehearsal room, that's where you get to really investigate
Wonderful
our ideas.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Lillian, for being here for this production. So, I want to introduce our audience now to the two men that create this conflict for our heroine, Leonora. The first is Don Pizarro, governor of the state prison, which he has used to horrific effect in suppressing his political enemies. He makes his entrance with an aria justifying his revenge against those that oppose him. He has received a letter informing him that the minister of the government is gravely concerned some of the prisoners have been wrongly held captive. Don Pizarro, guilty of the accusation, decides his only option is to kill his most secret prisoner, Florestan. So let's give a warm welcome to Mark Walters in the role of Pizarro for his aria, Welch ein Augenblick.
Ein Augenblick, die Räucher, die killen dich rufen der Geschick in deinen Herzen wielen, von großes Glück, die kleinen Händen wielen, von großes Glück. Schon war ich da im Schaume, dem Lotten schwarzem Raume, dahin, ja dahin gestreckt zu sein. Nun ist es mir geworden, den Mörder selbst zu morden. Nun ist es mir geworden, den Mörder selbst zu morden, den Mörder selbst zu morden. Kein Augenblick, die Räucher, die killen dich rufen der Geschick in deinen Herzen willen. Von großes Glück.
Bravo, Mark. That wakes one up in the morning. Yeah. Speaking of pushing one vocally, that's great, Mark. Fantastic. And welcome to Louisville.
Thank you. Very glad.
This is your premiere with us and your premiere of the role as well.
Yes. Yeah. Very excited. I'll be doing it again later in the season with Opera Omaha. So
oh,
a chance
wonderful.
to really dig into it.
Just talk just a little bit about this character, Pizarro.
Well, Don Pizarro, it's always interesting playing a villain or someone who is vengeful because you can't think of yourself that way. How do you play I am evil? Because Don Pizarro thinks he is very justified. He is in what he has done. He has captured Florestan in the middle of the night, who has been speaking out against my power. It's causing unrest in the area, and so I have to get things under control. So I grab him in the middle of the night, stick him in the bottom of the dungeon where nobody knows that he's there. I give him 2 ounces of black bread every day so that he dies very, very slowly. And at the point of this aria, I've just found out that I need to kill him this instant. And, you know, I have mixed feelings about it. It's, I'm happy that I finally get to kill him, but I really would have liked to have stretched it out a little bit longer if it were more possible.
I mean, what's not to like about this guy?
And also, just vocally in a piece like this, the great tenor Richard Tucker said that you have to ease a piece into your voice. You can't just blast off at it.
Right.
If that's where you end up singing it, you have to kind of work it into your voice over a matter of months to the point where I feel like it becomes like a controlled scream at many places.
That's been often said by a lot of singers of Beethoven, but when it's done right, it doesn't sound like that at all. Mark, thank you so much for joining us on this production.
Oh, thank you.
It's a delight to have you here. Our second important man in this conflict, we finally meet at the top of Act 2. Florestan, the husband of our heroine Leonora, has been starved, deprived of human contact, and confined inside his cell for 2 years. He feels his impending death, and despite his anger for being unjustly imprisoned, he subconsciously begins to accept his fate. In his 2-part aria, we experience a man in the most dire of conditions. We first hear him cry out in recitative, "God, what darkness here!" as he considers his unjust circumstances. His one hope, as he faces imminent death, is the vision of his beautiful wife, Leonora. So, please welcome Jonathan Burton to sing this aria, Gott, welch dunkel hier.
Welch lässt mich hier nicht lebet außer mir. O schwere Prüfung, doch gerecht ist Gottes Wille. Ich murre nicht, das Maß der Leiden steht bei dir. In des Lebens Frühlingstagen ist das Glück von mir geflohen. Wahrheit wagt ich kein zu sagen, und die Ketten sind mein Lohn. Will ich duldig alle Schmerzen, endlich meine Bahn. Süßer Trost in meinem Herzen, meine Pflicht, ja, meine Pflicht hab ich getan.
And that's just a warm-up. Thank you, John. Kara Shea, would you come up and join us at the tall microphone? One or the other. Welcome back to Louisville, both John and Kara Shea. We're delighted to have both of you back again. We last saw you, of course, in Tosca. Joe and I had the pleasure of directing and conducting you in Tosca last year in Dayton Opera.
Yes.
And we are thrilled to have you back here in Louisville to do these two wonderful roles. So thank you so much. Let's begin with you, John. Just talk a little bit about Florestan for the audience. And dramatically, yes, and the character, yes, but also talk a little bit vocally about this guy. Something, I think, a little bit different than some of the roles that you've been performing in the past.
Indeed, indeed. Florestan is I think, a beautiful spirit, a political idealist. Obviously, this man's rotting in a prison, and he's doing this because he's someone who wouldn't back down for fighting for what he believed in, which is the fact that that is an evil, evil man. It's a real pleasure to play someone so unambiguous. It's sometimes very wonderful to play a villain. Sometimes it's wonderful to play someone who's very complicated. But this man is very pure and very beautiful, and I love that.
You know, in certain respects, he is like Cavaradossi, except Cavaradossi has a couple of character flaws. One,
Yes.
that he loves Tosca too much.
Yes, it's a problem. It's a problem.
How is this vocally for you?
Vocally for me,
I mean, it sounds great. Don't get me wrong, but
I want to talk to you
why
about
do you
that
ask,
one.
David? It's as everything you and Maestro have said already, I would have said myself. It is stepping the toe into the waters of the Helden tenor in a way that in some ways for me is even more difficult than the Helden tenor, because it is held somewhat to those classical forms which keeps you
right.
on a certain tightrope that you must walk while still emoting this superb, dramatic music. I couldn't love it any more than I do.
Let's go to our dear Leonora Carachet. This is your first Leonora, as it is John's first Florestan as well.
It is. It's my first Leonora. And it's one of those roles that stays on your bucket list, and you hope that you get to do it. And David and Joey opened the door and have given me a chance, both of us, all of us, a chance to be a part of this work that doesn't get done very often, even though it's starting to show up in the rotation of companies. But this is an amazing opportunity.
A beautiful piece that should be done more often.
Yes.
Certainly there are...
With me.
conflicts and struggles in it. And yes, all over. What can I say? Yes. Let's talk just briefly about Leonora, this wonderful character, and rather adventuresome at this time in that Leonora is a woman, but
Yes.
she is not the victim.
No, she is completely the savior of the entire show. She believes that her job is to rescue not only her husband, but the entire fate of the people that live and dwell within this prison, and to stand up for all of the women whose husbands have been imprisoned for the wrong reasons. Maybe, for the right reasons, I'm not sure, but they are there beyond the time period that they should have been imprisoned. So she is there not only to speak for her own love and her own passion, but also for every other woman standing outside the gates waiting.
And in that, Beethoven and his librettists ennoble this piece beyond a little melodrama into something greater. The theme takes it beyond just a little melodrama.
I think so. I think that by the end of the evening, I hope that everyone in the audience feels that they have been rescued from whatever they're holding within them as their own prisoner, and that they can release themselves. Because the music by the end of this, I find it so interesting that it gradually progresses, and it's a big sing. And by the end, it is euphoric in where you lay in the voice, as well as with the entire orchestra, and the chorus is amazing. And I find myself just in rehearsal getting swept up and having goosebumples, because it is this amazing experience to be surrounded by all of that sound.
And in that way, cathartic.
Yes.
Well, John and Carachet, thank you so much for being
welcome.
with us on this show.
Thank you.
We are very
Thank you.
delighted. So going back to the dungeon, Florestan sleeps exhausted and alone. Following orders from Pizarro to prepare for the execution of Florestan, Rocco and Fidelio enter the dungeon to dig his grave. Still unsure if it is her husband, Leonora, disguised as Fidelio, attempts to make out the face of the prisoner. He awakes face to face with his wife, but he does not recognize her. She, on the other hand, is certain this prisoner is her husband. Pizarro enters, and Florestan now understands who is responsible for his captivity. Just as Pizarro approaches, with his dagger in hand, Leonora throws herself between the two men, pleading, "First kill his wife." Everyone is frozen to discover for the first time that Fidelio is in fact Leonora. Pizarro, still resolute, attempts to attack Florestan. To stop him, Leonora pulls out a pistol, and in this brief moment time stops. So let's continue on with our performance here with this Act 2 quartet from Fidelio, Sterbe. He dies.
Sterbe. Doch soll erst wissen, wer ihm sein totes Herz zerfleischt, der Rache dunkle Zeit zerrissen. Sieh her, du hast mich nicht getäuscht, Pizarro, wenn du stürzen wolltest. Pizarro, wenn du fürchten solltest, steht nun als Rächer, steht nun als Rächer, als Rächer hier. Pizarro, wenn du stürzen wolltest, Pizarro, wenn du stürzen solltest, steht nun als Rächer hier, als Rächer, steht nun als Rächer hier. Ein Mörder steht vor dir. Einer ruf ich dir, hast du getan zurück. Nur noch ein Augenblick und dieser Tod.
Geschworen musst du es dieser Preis, der Tod sei dir geschworen, der deine Mörder
Ein Zyniker, halt dich,
hat dir geschworen, der deine Mörder
ein Zyniker, er ist nicht Prophezeit, sein.
Tät ist sein
Sein Weib,
ein Weib. Ja, sie Leonore.
Leonore.
Ich bin sein Weib, geschworen hab ich im Trost, der Damen dir.
Ein Weib,
Ich bin sein Weib, geschworen hab ich im Trost, der Damen dir. Ich schloss deiner Brust,
einen Weib nehmen. Ich vor einen Weib nehmen. So abbrig meine Beine. Bring geteilt hast du mit ihm das Winter teilen nur. So teilen nur mit ihm den Tod, mit ihm den Tod.
Und du bist tot.
Always with the last word. Thank you all. This was the Act 2 quartet from Beethoven's Fidelio. And before we end the program today, I want to thank our audience here in the studio and out on the airways for joining us today for our live broadcast of Lunch and Listen. This with the artist from the first opera of Kentucky Opera's Brown Forman 2014-15 season, Beethoven's Fidelio. Performances are Friday, September 19th at 8 p.m., Sunday, September 21st at 2 p.m. in the W.L. Lyons Brown Theater. To buy tickets, call 502-584-7777 or toll-free 800-690-9236. You may also reach us on the web at www.kyopera.org for additional information or to purchase your tickets and pick your seats. In the final scene we will perform today, there is a trumpet heard announcing the arrival of the Prime Minister, Don Fernando. Pizarro flees as Florestan and Leonora are united at last. So, with this final number, please welcome John Burton as Florestan, Cara Shea Thompson as Leonora, to sing the triumphant Act 2 duet, O Namenlose Freude from Fidelio.
Brust, nach unbaren Leiden, zu ihrer große Lust. Nach unbaren Leiden, zu ihrer große